right, welcome back everyone to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving deep into strategy number 27 from Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War.
Which is?
Seem to work for the interests of others while furthering your own, the alliance strategy. Quite a mouthful.
It is. It is. But so much packed into that title. Really what we're talking about is partnerships, right? Alliances.
An alliance.
And how you can sort of use them on the surface, appearing like, yeah, this is a mutually beneficial situation. But underneath it all, there's that current, that strategic advancement of the individual, almost like a hidden current.
Yeah, it's not about being like totally dishonest, but it's about knowing what you want and using other people to get there.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think it's so interesting because like when I think about times when I'm trying to achieve something big,
Right.
I either go into like hardcore, heads down, get it done mode, like just me, myself, and I'm doing this. Or the other extreme is like, oh, let's all get together, kumbaya, and but you're not really thinking about the power dynamics at play. You're just like, oh, we should all be friends and do this together.
Yes. And the strategy it's much more intentional.
Yeah.
The core insight here is that temporary alliances formed with a very specific goal in mind can provide incredible leverage.
Temporary.
Temporary. You don't need permanent allies sometimes. Sometimes just a strategic shorter-term alignment
Right.
can unlock resources, give you cover, open doors that you couldn't open yourself.
And speaking of like, temporary alliances to get something done, one of the best examples that we came across in the research is Otto von Bismarck.
Classic.
Yeah.
Anyone who's sort of brushed up against 19th century European history, Bismarck, the architect of a unified Germany.
Yeah.
And he used alliances in a way that, well, it's almost a textbook example of this.
It is textbook. Like the way he did it was amazing.
So, we have to remember Bismarck comes to power in Prussia. Not a unified Germany yet, but a very powerful German state, with a strong military.
Yeah.
And Bismarck, he had this very clear ambition to consolidate German power under Prussian leadership.
Okay.
And he forged these alliances with Austria, with Russia, even with France at different times, but always presenting them as being in the service of European stability.
Okay, so he's saying like, hey, we're in this together. We need to do this for the greater good of Europe.
Exactly. Collective security.
Right.
Classic strategy.
That's okay.
But what's really interesting is if you look closer, there's a much more, subtle game at play.
Yeah.
He was so adept at managing the tensions between those very same allies that he was allied with.
That's so smart.
It's incredible. Almost like he would orchestrate little conflicts or disagreements between them, almost to weaken the players around him.
Oh my God.
And the way he did it is so fascinating because he would go to each power and he would say something different to each one. Like to Austria, he would emphasize, shared Germanic culture, right?
Yeah.
To Russia, he'd say, hey, we're both concerned about, these other European powers.
Yeah.
To France, maybe he'd dangle the promise of future territorial gains.
Oh, wow. So he's playing everybody.
He was tailoring the narrative, yeah.
That is so crazy. So basically, like, what happened?
Well, eventually, right.
Yeah.
These alliances, they served their purpose. They isolated Prussia's enemies.
Right.
They weakened the rivals. And at a certain point, Bismarck shifts his approach. And, long story short, Prussia ends up victorious in a series of wars.
And Germany is born.
And the German Empire is born.
Wow.
Right. And so the key takeaway here for me is that for Bismarck, alliances were instruments. They weren't these enduring bonds of loyalty. His long-term vision was primary.
Right.
The alliances were just tools to achieve that vision.
So if we connect this back to what Greene says in the book, it's like the example of the alliance with Austria at first that gave Prussia more military resources.
Right.
Then by sort of letting Austria and France fight it out amongst themselves and weaken each other.
Less risk.
Less risk for Prussia, right.
Exactly.
And because no one really saw that Bismarck was aiming for total German unification, he was sort of like,
Greater control. Yeah.
Behind the scenes.
Allaying the strings.
Wow, it's so fascinating to think about.
It is.
It's not just history. This stuff is happening like everywhere, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like our research talked about businesses, politics, like even personal interactions.
Yeah.
Think about companies that partner up so they can enter a new market.
Yeah.
They share distribution networks. Maybe they share technology.
Sure.
But then later, what happens? They're like, bitter rivals,
Exactly.
or one of them buys out the other one. It's the same thing.
It's happening all the time. And what's interesting to me is that it happens without us really acknowledging it. Like, we don't talk about it in those terms.
Yeah.
Like, take politics, right?
Yeah.
We see coalitions forming to win elections, and they talk about shared goals, shared values, right?
Right. Right.
But once they're in power, these seemingly unified fronts, they dissolve pretty quickly, don't they?
Yeah.
As individual agendas reemerge. And it's like, oh, it was just a temporary convergence of interests
Totally.
to achieve a very specific objective.
And, I was thinking, even on a personal level, like, we're always told to network, right?
Of course.
Build your network, make connections, and you're doing it because you're hoping those connections will help you down the line.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully there's genuine rapport,
Yeah.
and you actually like these people.
Well, ideally, yeah.
Ideally, right.
Yeah.
But there's also that sort of unspoken awareness of like, maybe this will come back and benefit me.
Absolutely. The potential for reciprocal benefit. It's there.
It's there.
It's unspoken, but it's there.
Okay, so we've got the historical examples, right?
Yay.
But how do we actually apply this, like, in the real world?
Right.
Our research had this really interesting example. Elon Musk.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
So, he does all these collaborations with the government and other companies
Yeah.
for Tesla and SpaceX.
Yeah.
And at first, they were presented as like this shared commitment to, saving the planet and exploring space.
Right. Sustainable energy and space exploration, these big, noble goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And through those partnerships, he got tons of government funding
Right.
and access to all these resources and technology, right?
Exactly.
So it looked like a win-win. Like, the government is supporting innovation, and Musk is getting what he needs to do these really ambitious things.
Yeah. But if we zoom out, right, and we look at the big picture, it's really striking how those collaborations, seemingly collaborative, really just propelled Musk and his companies to the forefront. He used those alliances to gain momentum, to scale up his operations.
Yeah.
And now Tesla, SpaceX, they're dominant, right? They're practically setting the agenda in their respective fields.
Right.
And so I think the lesson here is using alliances to get the resources you need, right? To get that initial boost. But while you're doing it, you're never letting go of your core vision.
Right. You're always in control.
You are always in control. That's the key.
You're the one steering the ship.
You're the one steering the ship. Exactly.
Okay, so that's fascinating.
Yeah.
But in the research, there's this big emphasis on providing value.
Right?
Right. You can't just take. You've got to give something back.
Of course. Of course. It can't be totally one-sided. You have to offer something that genuinely benefits your partner.
Right.
Even if, in the long term,
Yeah.
you're getting the bigger advantage.
It's like creating this perception that you're both winning.
Exactly. You're both winning. It's a perception of mutual benefit.
Right. Even if you're winning more.
Even if the scales tip a little bit.
A little bit.
It's a delicate balance.
Right. So there are all these benefits, right, to alliances.
Yes.
But there's this warning in the sources that I thought was super important.
Oh, yeah. What's
You
it?
can't become too reliant on alliances.
Right.
Because if you do, and then they change or go away, you're screwed.
You're vulnerable. Absolutely.
Wouldn't it
And it goes back to Bismarck even. Those alliances, they were helpful at first, but there's always that risk, right? If the people you're working with, if they feel used or manipulated, well, they could turn on you.
They could become your enemies.
They could become your enemies. So you need to have that foresight to avoid creating resentment, because that could really bite you later.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So another good example that we found of strategic leveraging,
Okay.
the U.S. in World War II.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
So, in the early days of the war,
Right.
the U.S. was supplying Britain and the Soviet Union.
providing supplies, yeah. Lend-Lease, all of that.
They were the key ally
Uh-huh.
fighting against Germany and Japan,
Right.
but they weren't really sending in huge numbers of troops at first.
Right. Not a full commitment of troops right away.
They were basically leveraging their allies.
Right. To do the heavy lifting at first.
Yeah, interesting.
And then by the end of the war, well, the U.S. is this huge global power, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, their goal wasn't just about winning the war. It was about shaping, what happened after.
It was about the post-war era,
Right.
the geopolitical landscape,
They were using the alliances to get to where they wanted to be.
to position themselves for the
Yeah.
future.
So alliances, really powerful tools for the long game.
Yes.
If you do it right.
But there's a subtlety here that I think is really important. You
Yeah.
have to avoid making your real intentions too obvious.
Like, you can't be like, hey, I'm using you. Exactly. Exactly. If your allies suspect that they're just pawns in your game, they might change their mind
Yeah.
about being your ally.
Yeah.
You have to make them truly believe,
Right.
that they are getting something out of this alliance.
That it's good for them.
That it's good for them.
Okay, so that brings us to, well, let's call it a cautionary tale.
Oh, okay, I like this.
Napoleon and his failed European alliances.
Right, Napoleon.
I mean, this guy was a brilliant military strategist,
Yeah.
formed all these alliances across Europe.
He had a lot of allies.
He had a lot of allies, right?
Yeah.
But the research pointed out that he kept demanding more and more
Oh.
from his partners and like basically exploiting them
Oh, so he was taking too much.
too much.
Yeah.
And in the end, well, they betrayed him.
They betrayed him. That makes sense. If
Okay.
you push people too far, they're gonna push back. So even the most powerful alliances, they can break down if one side is too greedy.
Right. It's got to feel like it's a win for everybody.
It has to be a win-win. At least it has to feel that way.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
A lot of historical examples, a lot of big ideas.
Yeah.
But like, how do we actually take all this stuff and like use it?
Right. How do we put it into practice?
Well, the sources, they give us some really good actionable steps.
Oh, good. I like this.
So first, the alliances that you get into, they have to actually give you something you need, whether it's resources, influence, power.
Right. It has to be strategic. You have to choose your alliances carefully.
And this is a big one. You always have to have an exit strategy.
Oh, that's so smart.
Right.
Yeah.
Because remember, these are temporary,
Yes, temporary alignments.
but you need to know when you're done
Exactly.
and how to get out without causing a bunch of problems.
Gracefully.
Gracefully.
Minimizing damage.
Yeah.
It's a delicate operation.
Okay, so number 3,
Okay, number 3.
always check in with your partners.
Okay.
Make sure they feel like getting what they want.
Right.
Make sure they feel like they're winning.
That sense of mutual benefit.
It has to be there.
It's crucial.
And, this is interesting. The sources suggest that you don't reveal your long-term goals right away.
Oh, interesting. Kind of keep them under wraps a little bit.
Yeah, because if you tell everyone your master plan too soon,
Right.
they might try to stop you.
They might resist.
So let the alliance do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then later, if you need to, you can reveal more.
You can reveal the grand vision. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
And then finally, you have to know when to end the alliance.
Okay.
Like if it's not working anymore,
Right.
it might be holding you back.
Yeah.
So know when to walk away.
Know when to walk away.
And speaking of walking away, the research brought up this really good modern example,
Okay.
Facebook.
Oh, Facebook. Okay.
So they had these partnerships with Instagram
Yeah.
and WhatsApp.
Right.
And at first, it seemed like they just wanted to, support innovation, get more users.
Yeah.
These collaborations, they let Instagram and WhatsApp grow like crazy because they were using Facebook's resources.
Right. The infrastructure, everything.
Everything, right.
So it was a win-win. Like these platforms, they could scale up so quickly.
Yeah,
But then, of course, Facebook bought them.
they did.
Both of them.
They bought them both. So no more competition.
Done more competition. So, that's another example of like using alliances to get stronger.
Uh-huh.
And then you decide what to do with those companies later.
You decide their fate. You're in control.
You're in control.
It's a classic power play.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Strategy 27, it's like really clear. Alliances, they can be awesome tools.
Yeah.
But it's not about being like best friends forever.
Yeah.
It's about strategy.
It's about getting what you want. And real power comes from like using these alliances without becoming dependent on them.
Right. You want to be in control, not control.
And I love this. At the end of the book, Greene, he gives these 2 questions that you should always ask yourself when you're in a partnership. Is this helping me more than my partner?
Good question.
And do I have a way out?
So important.
That's like, it's all about having that control.
It is. It is. And, the final line of the strategy, it sums it all up, right? Seem to work for the interests of others while furthering your own.
Oh, yeah.
And you will always have the upper hand.
Wow. So powerful.
Yeah.
So as we all go out there navigating our own collaborations and partnerships,
Right.
whether it's work, business, personal life, think about the principles we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
Bismarck, Musk, the U.S. in World War II, Facebook,
Yeah.
They all use this alliance strategy, and understanding it can really change how you approach those relationships.
Absolutely.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.